we are going to introduce, she is going to introduce it in more depth in a moment. What we are doing today is addressing how your work links in with her work. So one of the ways that we collect data from our affiliates is through the APR. That's the Affiliate Performance Report that we collect every year. The APR asks parents as teachers affiliates how many families they serve during the past program year. It also asks how many families of the total families served were known to have experienced certain stressors, such as reported or substantiated cases of child maltreatment or neglect. In the 2020-2021 program year, 854 US-based parents as teachers affiliates submitted APR data. They reported serving nearly 80,000 families and almost 100,000 children. 71% of affiliates reported serving at least one family with a reported or substantiated case of child maltreatment or neglect. On average, each affiliate provided services to roughly 6 families with a reported or substantiated case of child maltreatment. That's about 6% of the total affiliate family populations. In comparison, the national average for investigated and alternative responses to child maltreatment cases is about 0.5% of the total US child population. Parents as teachers affiliates therefore come into contact with families experiencing this stressor at a much higher rate than the national average. This is partly because families may be referred to parents as teachers services following an investigation or as part of an alternative response to a child maltreatment report. In order to better understand the families that our affiliates serve, families with reported or substantiated cases of child maltreatment were sorted into categories and assessed for change over time. These categories range from affiliates who report serving no families with this stressor, that big green bar on the far left, to affiliates who report that more than 15% of their total parents as teachers families experience this stressor, which is that brown bar on the far right. Over the past 4 program years, which are those categorical clusters of bars, our affiliates have increased servicing families with allegations of child maltreatment. There has been a drop in affiliates who report serving no families. That roughly corresponds with an increase in affiliates reporting that more than 15% of their total families served had a reported or substantiated case of child maltreatment. In many ways, home visitors are professional bystanders, in that the role of the parent educator is to help parents become their child's first teacher, and then to step back and let them do it. To provide guidance, assistance, advice, toolkits, but not to take over parenting or teaching in place of the actual parents. Support Over Silence for Kids was created to answer the question, what do you do when you see caregiver-child conflict, but your role is that of a bystander? Support Over Silence for Kids is a bystander training program that prepares community members, hospital personnel, and other professionals to confidently diffuse challenging moments between caregivers and their children. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Nancy Weaver. I had the privilege of working on her team as a graduate student at St. Louis University when Support Over Silence for Kids was first being conceptualized. Today, she has graciously agreed to introduce the Support Over Silence for Kids model and to explore modifications that may be appropriate to home visitor bystanders.
Thanks, Tatiana. It's so really lovely to be here. We'll use the chat throughout, so if there are any technical difficulties or questions that arise, please feel free to enter into the chat window any questions that you have. I'll tell you that we're going to have 2 short breakout rooms kind of during the course of our conversation to sort of get the wheels spinning and allow a bit of conversation about how this model can apply to your work. So I'm excited for that, and you're welcome to participate to the extent that your technology allows and you're wherever you are, wherever that's comfortable for you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about this program, but I have to start with how it started. And how it started was at a pizza place. So I'll tell you that I don't like pizza. I don't like all you can eat buffets. I don't drink beer. And it's a Friday night and everybody's off of work and they're, joyous and jubilant and eating bad pizza and drinking bad beer. And I'm with my family, my mom, my dad, my kids. And out of this joyous event, we hear a grandmother, we assume, start to really, really yell at her children. She's shoving them into the booths, yanking them over to the pizza, throwing pizza at them, yelling loudly at them. And she's starting to escalate. And everyone in the pizza parlor is starting to hush. And then we do this. We look, we go like this. We go and see my face. We go, what's she doing? And we're irritated. We're mad. She's interrupting our Friday and she's making a scene. And we didn't come here for that. We got this going on. And nobody knew what to do. And so in my own foolishness, because literally, mind you, I have no skills for this. Tatiana showed you that I have a PhD and that's about as useless in this situation as, any other. I stand up, I walk over to the table and I sit down, not knowing what I'm going to say or do, obviously. And all I said was, it looks like you guys are really struggling. And the grandmother softened and she told me all about the stressors and that her daughter couldn't get off work and the car was in the shop and on and on and on and on and on. And we had this short little interaction. I went back to my table. The manager comes over and thanks me profusely. Nobody knew what to do. So I come back home after that and I started asking questions. I knocked on my psychology friend's door and I said, hey, this is what I did. Did I do it right? And she said, I don't know. And I talked to my child abuse pediatricians and I say, hey, did I do it right? And he goes, I don't know. And I talked to my home educators, my home visitors. Did I do it right? I don't know. And so that sort of spurred us onto this multi-year process of answering that question. What do we do? Most importantly, what do we do so that we support our parents, that we do that with compassion, judgment-free, that we do it empathetically, that we understand trauma, that we understand culture, that we understand policy. And so we then went on a mission. And Support Over Silence for Kids is a bit of the journey, is part of the journey of that mission. So Support Over Silence for Kids was sort of born from that. And it's designed to be those things. It's very empathy-driven, very evidence-based, action-focused. And so what I'd like to do today is tell you just a little bit about this program to sort of whet your appetite, and then to pose a few questions for you about how this might be a useful model in your role as professional bystanders. And if there are things here that sound appealing to you or useful to you, and how we might explore those further. So that's the arc of our next 45 minutes or so. So the development of Support Over Silence for Kids followed what we think of as a very traditional public health model. We used tons of formative research, customer discovery, 20 focus groups, meeting with stakeholders. And we folded in a lot of behavioral science theory, social science theory, psychology, social work, and most recently, a lot of the new studies on neuroscience, social and emotional learning, mindfulness. How do we think about our own physiological response when we see things that make us uncomfortable? And how do we plan ahead for those things? I also threw in a ton of stuff on the existing bystander models, social marketing, branding, health comm, and very wacky partnerships like I do a lot of improvisational theater, and the world of applied improvisation really has a lot to say about when we find ourselves in public without that guidebook. So the development was rigorous, and I share that with you to say that it's a thoughtful and well-conceived, I think, if I do say so myself, approach to a problem that most of us have faced, and yet not many of us know what to do about. So the program then, these are the objectives. We want to give bystanders the skills to confidently diffuse challenging moments between a caregiver and their child. And we do that by first increasing confidence of noticing things. As we walk around in the world, as we are in a home, as we are Zooming with clients, it's difficult for us to notice threats, risk factors, triggers, traumas. Those are challenging things to be sensitive to. And so our training focuses on that. We then do some kind of exploration about our own barriers. Are there demographic barriers? Are there barriers related to context or setting? And then before we train bystanders on exactly what to do, like here's our portfolio of options for you, it's really important that we convince people or we persuade people. We talk about what our responsibility is. And this is unique to bystander work related to child abuse and neglect, because that's often thought of as a very private thing. So how do we train people in a public sphere to support parents doing a very private thing? And so doubling back on that notion of compassion and judgment-free and empathy, that allows us to be supportive at a time where support is generally very accepted. Whereas critique and judgment and fixing and saving typically are not. So that's really what distinguishes the support over silence for kids type of approach. We heard a lot this idea that, so as a bystander, I believe we do have a responsibility, but I just don't know. I don't know what I can change. I don't know what I can do. I don't know if anything I do is going to be helpful. And we heard this a lot. We heard things like, the parents were verbally aggressive with their child, but their child was just acting in an age-appropriate way. I'm very inclined not to engage. I'm going to keep my eye on it, but I'm not going to interject myself into a situation. So what we learned, and this was really, I have to tell you, kind of a turning point for support over silence for kids. What we learned is that people in helping roles, like the, collection of you here, your role professionally is to coach and educate and train and help families, evolve and develop to a place where they can really be confident and feel good about parenting, their relationship with their kids, attachment, child development, all of those things. What we learn, though, in bystander work is that we don't need to fix parenting. And that was, I say, a turning point, because we realized that what was keeping people from supporting was the fact that they thought that supporting meant fixing and saving and rescuing and all of those things. When we decided to let bystanders sort of off the hook for fixing and really draw their attention to a very supportive approach, bystander engagement went through the roof. Everybody felt like they could do that. And when we started that frame, that allowed us to watch these beautiful things emerge. So we heard, for instance, this is when the magic happened. Thanks be to God. There was a woman in the group who came out of nowhere. She had a paper bag or something that she had in her hand, and she started making it like a puppet. And in that particular moment, this woman was an angel. She truly was. And we heard from lots and lots and lots of people about how, when they were a kid, if just one person would have noticed, or if just one person would have modeled a behavior, if just one person had been sort of validating for their experience, it might have changed the trajectory of their childhood. And so support over silence for kids is sort of a training for what we might do, but also it's very much a call to action. Can we as community members think about a time where this may happen in our world and how we might react? Okay, so that's the first question here that I want to get together in our breakout rooms. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I would like to ask, Tatiana is going to help us with breakout rooms here in a minute. And here is the question that I'd like you to talk about, maybe just for 5 or 7 minutes, again, just to sort of get the wheels turning. Here's the question. have you ever been in a situation during a home visit or any other time in your professional or personal day where a parent and child were visibly struggling? And how did you respond? And how did you feel about that response? So Tatiana, you could go ahead and open up those breakout rooms. Tatiana is also going to share her email there. So as you guys are thinking, if you could maybe just take some notes in a notes page and then share them with Tatiana, she's happy to sort of collect those. And we'll do a little mini reporting back when we all get back together.
Keeping doing me in here.
Looks good.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi. How are you? So Tatiana has shared her email in the chat. For those of you in a position to share notes with her electronically, feel free to do that. We always would love to hear a bit about your discussion. We don't have time to fully explore that right now, but I would like to call on some folks because, we're in Zoom, so I got to call on people. We're going to repeat myself since we're all just kind of coming back into the swing of things. I have this window right here. It's really storming out there. I don't know what's coming across the country, but South Carolina, you folks better watch out over there because it's spinning west to east. So welcome back from your breakout room. Please take a peek at Tatiana's email. And if you haven't already, I will go ahead and sort of recopy this for you so that you have her email address. You can, I know, Catherine, it went fast. Thanks for your notes. No, Kelly, I'm sorry. I can't control the weather. Thanks for your notes to Tatiana. Let's take a couple of minutes now. I know we don't have too long to talk about that. So I'm going to do the old-fashioned teacher trick and call on some folks. If you're not in a position to share, just ignore me and I won't take it personally and I'll engage somebody else. So let me invite others to the conversation. Room 1. What about Jeanette? Where do we see Jeanette? Jeanette, are you in a place where you can unmute and share a bit?
Yes, I was trying to type the notes because the room was wonderful and I don't type fast enough. But our group was giving information. So I was taking notes, ladies. So they suggested being helpful versus judgmental. One of the young ladies was transitioning from the classroom to home visitor. And she has done redirecting with opening with, let's try this. It was suggested to replace one action with another action. And one observer was observing the child along with the mother having a tantrum. But she posed to the mother, how do you feel when she does that? So she said that immediately gave the mother a thought that this person cares for her and was compassionate. So that's a little bit about it. Wow, what I got out of our group.
Oh my goodness, I love it. I feel like we could have conversations until next Tuesday about that. I'm going to take one more, maybe some comments from room 4. How about Erica? Are you in a place where you can share a few things? What about Catherine? Catherine Layden?
Hi, yeah, I just put some in the chat. But yeah, we had a few members who were grateful that they hadn't had this like direct experience. We also had a parent who was kind enough to be vulnerable and share her own experience, and just kind of, you know, thinking of it from the parent's perspective. And then as a home visitor, I'm a mental health consultant now, but when I was a home visitor for many years, I experienced this in many different ways. So I just had shared, you know, some different things that I had done, and that it really depends on the relationship with the family, but definitely an opportunity to model, and to be
Right.
curious and caring.
These are what you've all described is, I think, a really beautiful articulation. To me, knowing about sort of parents as teachers, the vision, the philosophy, the approach, it's a supportive framework. And the way you guys are all talking about this really shows me how grounded the work is in that really positive framework. And so I'm hopeful that some of those tools can be, you know, particularly useful as we move along. So let me tell you a little bit about the framework. I'm going to go back here to view gallery. I know we got a little topsy-turvied with our screen shares. So Support Over Silence for Kids takes place right now on Zoom. It's a 3-hour training. We also have a model that's a train the trainer kind of format. We've done lots of things, you know, like everybody gets a certificate. Organizations that have done it, we do some really cool branding with, you know, we are a Support Over Silence for Kids organization. We have those little cards, you know, that you can put on your badge. We have stickers. Wait, what's this? Oh yeah, we got facilitator and participant manuals. So we have a great collection of, you know, like pieces, programmatic pieces that people can use as they need. But the way it's developed is we do an introduction, welcome people, and we spend some time on that. For people to talk about child abuse and neglect, for people to talk about the tense things and relationships they sometimes see between parents and children. What you just even mentioned when you were talking about the vulnerability that's required. I facilitate these trainings in a way that creates a space where we can all really dive into this. We acknowledge then that this is really just a moment in time. So unlike your work in the home, bystander models really acknowledge that we don't know what happened in this duo's life before we came into contact with them at the grocery store. And we don't know what's going to happen after they leave the grocery store. We know that in that moment, we are sharing space. We are sharing this moment in time. And so the training acknowledges that we're not doing a big old history and we are not following up. And there's a certain beauty in that. Because if we approach the situation as a bystander with the mindset of, let me assess if it's bad enough and then fix you if you need to be fixed, it's sending the message that the way these people are parenting is wrong, is bad, and we know better. And that's gotten us into a bit of trouble. So our premise is that parents are doing the best they can at the time they can with the resources they can. And that most of the time, parents want to be good parents and kids want to be good kids. And that anytime there's a struggle, there's a kid melting down, there's a parent having a crisis moment in public, behavior is always a signal of communicating a feeling, right? So biologically, the neuroscience suggests that our dysregulation comes from a very intense emotion or a very intense feeling with a not quite sufficient ability to regulate that emotion. So this gap between what we can regulate in the moment and what we need to be regulating in the moment is big. So as bystanders, if we come in and walk alongside and support, we can help to co-regulate. We can work on our nervous system. We can pause. We can help turn down the temperature. And if we focus on that, that's enough. And so our training sort of mimics that. So we talk about how to react. We talk about the kids' acronym, we practice, there's a call to action, and it's a very dynamic exchange. Now, we did go on Zoom, obviously, because we're all on Zoom. This was when we did it in person. We have found that the work we're doing on Zoom actually works pretty well. You can role play on Zoom pretty darn well. Like I said, I've got some improvisation experience that I sort of bring to that table. And that really has allowed us to create those connections, really balancing a playful approach to learning and role play and being a supportive bystander with the sensitivity to a topic that's really, really important. So even though we've switched to Zoom, we have found that it's been, pretty effective in our evaluation. We can use things like this. This was a Mentimeter board where we asked, like, how do you feel it in your body when you see things like this? And so we can create these word clouds and really talk about the barriers for intervening in really interesting ways using some technology. So Zoom has offered us some opportunities, although it's been, as you might expect, a blink challenging. In public, then, we have to be able to notice when things happen that might be high risk for, it may be abuse, it may be tension, it may be stress. And this is how we think about those situations when we're in the middle of our training. And when we ask these questions, have you seen this happening in public? The answer is usually yes. And we spend then the bulk of our time working through what it is we can do as bystanders. So in the interest of time, we won't go into all of that here, but I'm happy to talk more with you. The approach follows the kids' acronym. So K is keep to yourself and offer kind words. I is intervening directly. D is using distraction, and S is seeking help. And we've really been delighted to see how participants take this framework and sort of make it their own. Like I'm somebody who could, start singing the ABC song in the middle of the produce aisle at the grocery store. But not everybody is. You might be someone who is more likely to maybe go find someone else to enlist some assistance. What we have found to be most important is that the expression of support is one of, I have your back, I'm here in solidarity. I'm going to watch my facial expressions. I'm going to extend graciousness. And I'm going to recognize that, we've all been there. And once we bring this lens to the bystander work that we're doing, our participants have been really, really, I think their confidence in stepping forward and engaging has really gone up. So it's kind of a twofold thing. Number one, recognize that we have the responsibility to engage and support our community. And then number two, having the skills to do that with the assurances that you're not going to make things worse, that your personal safety isn't in question. And I love the conversation you had in the breakout rooms from the little snippets that we got, because really it's that validation. You might say things like, I know it's really hard to stand in line when you're hungry. Or I know you really wanted that candy bar. Or I know, Mom, it is so hard to be at the grocery store when your child won't stay in the cart. Oh my gosh, it used to drive me crazy when my kids would run across the parking lot. I know that is so scary. So when we meet these situations, we know that the mom or the dad or the caregiver, cortisol is high, physiological response is high, the child is amped up. And if we can just pause, take a breath, regulate ourselves, we can then model and validate and support in a way that that parent and that child might not be able to see in the moment. And that's been an effective strategy in making bystanders feel a little bit more confident and welcome and encouraged to offer that kind of support. So we do that through role playing. This is one of our scenarios at a farmer's market. And then we end with a personal plan, where on Zoom, everybody signs it and punches their little hearts and writes their names and really sort of begins to reorient their role as one of support. Now, you might be asking yourselves like, okay, so it's kind of interesting for us because in some ways it feels very simple. And in other ways, it feels very powerful. And so, of course, as any good public health practitioner, we've done a lot of evaluation work. And I'm happy to send you the links or the papers that have come out of that. But people seem to kind of appreciate this orientation. It's one that is a little foreign at first. But when we begin to think through how I would lend support, and we begin to tell stories and hear from parents that type of support is really, really helpful, then we know we're onto something. And here's, I think, one of the most interesting findings. We just published this a couple of months ago, hot off the presses, as they say. So we asked people before training, how did you react the last time you saw a caregiver and a child, or caregiver yelling at a child or physically hurting a child in public? So yelling or physically hurting a child. Now, when we asked them before the training, 46% of the people we trained said they ignored it. So half of the people that we surveyed said they ignored it when they saw a child being physically abused or physically hurt in public, 46%. And then look, afterwards, nobody said they ignored it. I was like, okay, that's cool. Isn't that neat? So we may not be, we might not be moving the needle from, for the most dire cases. And we might not be, able in that moment to, provide lots of parenting tips as you guys are in the field. But we are able to engage a community of support around a parent and a child who are struggling. And that to me was pretty cool. And we had lots of other positive types of results too. So if I see a caregiver struggling, it's my job to help. We saw significant changes there. I know what to do if I see them threatening or yelling. And overcoming barriers. There's a lot of conversation about, I'm a 5'1", white woman. If somebody different than me is struggling, do I feel like I have a role to help that person as well? And as it turns out, barriers related to demographics were addressed in the training. So it's been nice to see that kind of effect evolving out of just a 3-hour online training session. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen again because here's the next question. And I know this is like super quick, but I'm going to post another question here into the chat window. Here is the question. Dun, dun, dun. Whoops, I clicked the wrong button. Here's the question. How might this approach, support over silence for kids, be a useful framework for helping parents and their children develop skills for emotional regulation? So as you're teaching these competencies with your parents, how might you model or teach or incorporate some of this learning. And then the same for the group connections, either in person or virtual. So let's spend maybe about 5 minutes, again, on just a quick random breakout rooms, maybe just generate some thoughts about that. And then we'll get back together and do the same kind of thing before we wrap up. So Tatiana, I'll turn it over to you for the breakout rooms.
Empowerment and leadership.
Right. And I think any type of activity that's focusing on that collective approach can be really powerful.
Absolutely.
Welcome back, everyone, as you're arriving. Hello, hello. We're just chatting here about all the different programmatic elements and where things might fit together and where we might see parallels. Every time Tracy comes on the screen, the little dog, her dog just makes me smile. And Denise has the pinwheel. Thank you. The Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Month. Pinwheel.
You should have seen us all last Friday.
Oh, you were all pinwheeled?
The entire organization. Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. We did the blue shirts and the blue backgrounds, and yeah, absolutely. So if you would take a moment to maybe paste in the chat any little tidbits that came out of your conversation that you think might illustrate or might be things that we explore. Again, there's Tatiana's email if you want to email for her any ideas that you have. I'm going to kind of finish up slides and then open it up for conversation, and we can talk maybe about some of these ideas when we do that as well. So what's up with support over silence for kids now? What we're doing now is really scaling up from the models that we developed, developing the train the trainer models, developing more extensive toolkits, online training modules, really hoping to supplement some of the work that's going on throughout the country and globally related to child welfare. And the partnerships have been great. We've been working in Kentucky with Kentucky Youth Advocates. We've been working through our innovation and child maltreatment centers with our groups in Rochester, New York. So we find that when we create pockets and networks and sort of saturate an environment with really engaged bystanders, it creates a community where parents feel supported and not judged or critiqued, or they're not getting that side eye look. They're really feeling like they can be welcome into a space, bringing the parenting that they have. And that's been a really encouraging signal that we've had from a lot of our partners. We definitely would encourage you to get involved, follow along with social media, take a peek at some of our online kinds of resources. And then this is where to find me. So you can find me on LinkedIn or email me there. And I would be super excited to talk with any of you further about training opportunities, research questions, helping your practice, thinking about ways that this work can overlap. Again, I think that the foundational elements are very consistent with the philosophy and the approach of parents as teachers, allowing parents to find their own way with parenting while modeling and validating that raising children is difficult and that we all need support in how we do that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and open it up for questions or conversation at this point. We have a few minutes left, and I'll just kind of try to keep my comments kind of short and see if we can generate some discussion. So just unmute yourself and call out. Any comments about that overlap? I'm reading them now.
One comment that was lifted up in our group is the fact that there are so many parent educators that over the last 2 years literally have onboarded as virtual home visitors and haven't done in-person visits with families or group connections, and we're all kind of making this transition back to peopling. So it's a nice, it could be a great professional development resource for home visitors. And in the group connection, I think opportunity was also lifted up as a toolbox, a tool for parents as well, because we all move about and can experience situations where, we just feel like we don't know what to do, but know that we should do something.
That's a remarkable framing. I love your note about it. We're peopling now. And I'll say, even though it's a little bit off topic, this is an opportunity to create human connection that we've all been missing, and connecting with each other, with organizations, with communities. That connection, that's a protective factor from itty bitty to senior citizens. And we've been missing that. So if we can lead with that example, if we can invite all of people and who they are into our space, so that we are creating those connections through our stories and our lived experience and our sharing of struggles in ways that are non-judgmental, that's an exciting opportunity for me. So I appreciate your reflecting on that. And right, Barbara, you mentioned in about group 4, I think when we talk about our behaviors, our parenting behaviors, our child's behaviors, again, these are things to be curious about. Why is this happening? It's always a signal. It's always a note to ourselves to be curious. It's a note to ourselves to say, this makes me really anxious and really uncomfortable and really nervous. And I can also step forward and show support. The dialectics of that models for these parents. I can have a hard day. I can be frustrated with my child. And also I can show that kid love in this environment under this, these sets of circumstances. And it's just a great opportunity to connect and validate and model just throughout the lifespan, I think. All right, I'm seeing the clock tick down and I don't like that. But any other thoughts or comments, questions about the program, the evaluation, ideas you have about how this may connect?
Yes, can you talk a little more about the program?
So about the pieces of the program itself?
Yes.
So it's a 3-hour training. We have facilitators that come in and help brainstorm a conversation. It's very interactive. We engage people from all sorts of, professional places. And it's modularized sort of by, the problem, the barriers, the skills, and then sort of that call to action at the end.
Thank you.
Self-talk. I like that, Molly. It's also a great family, friends, and neighborhood providers. Yeah, I'm not as familiar with that part of your programming, but I think you're right. It's this sense of camaraderie, it's the solidarity of parenting. And I think that's been a really useful framing.
But Nancy, that comment on from Constance on family, friends, and neighbor providers reminds me of what you mentioned you've been doing up in Rochester. And I thought that it might be a good opportunity to speak to that project.
So we have a couple of partnerships that have really extended into organizations and communities. So you might expect, for instance, when people say, when I ask the question, have you ever seen this in public? People say yes, and they tell me exactly where. And I'm not going to use the direct name of the store where they see it. But you can imagine there are places where you may be able to shop for 24 hours where this happens, right? Grocery stores, hospitals, amusement parks. And so what's really powerful is if we are training the workforce who sees these kinds of things to be accepting and supportive. Because as an entrepreneur, like the business world, likes to look at, customer discovery and where are the pain points. And if you talk to a parent about grocery shopping, that's a difficult ask. So if we look at this sort of inversely, how do we create places within communities that are supportive of parents so that parents aren't worried about being called out or being criticized or given the side eye when they're out in public? How do we create those spaces that are like very supportive of that parenting approach, regardless of culture, of race, of ethnicity, of size, of gender, et cetera, et cetera? That can be we can weave that web and really address that prevention piece, right? So that's just one part of this very large prevention framework. And so that's sort of the model that we're exploring now with some of our partners. Okay, I see that it's 2:00. I'm sorry to hand the reins back over to Tatiana, but please do reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can talk further. I'd love to hear your ideas. And thank you so much for having me during Child Abuse Prevention Month, and good luck with all of your work.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And yeah, it was too short. We're sorry to lose you so soon.